You once said the most dangerous person is one who is articulate. What would you recommend to someone who wants to learn to speak in a more articulate manner? Oh, articulated is an interesting word because if your joints are articulated, it means you can do things with them. They're not one solid, vague mass. They're differentiated. Someone who's graceful is articulated and compelling because they're articulated. Speech is a form of articulation in that manner because the act of speech itself is extremely complicated, a sort of dance with your tongue, so to speak. It is definitely the case that there is no more exceptional form of the capacity to be dangerous than to be articulate. One of the things that really shocks me, and part of the reason my son and I, along with our coworkers, developed this essay app, is that young men in particular are never taught this. Why learn to be literate? Do you want to be competent and dangerous, or do you want to be vague and useless? Those are your options. It doesn't matter what your job is, whether you're a plumber, and I have great respect for plumbers, by the way, or anything else. If you're articulate, you can negotiate with your clients, introduce your coworkers, make a case for your employees, advertise your services, and think through your problems. You're firing on all cylinders. Our whole culture is based on the supremacy of the word. It's the word that extracts habitable order from chaos and possibility. The reason our culture is predicated on that idea is that it's a deep truth. To the degree that our culture embodies it, it works. It's a great thing to be articulate, and it would be so lovely if educators were wise enough to communicate this appropriately to young men striving forward. They need to know in no uncertain terms that if they want to make themselves into forces to be reckoned with, there's no surer route than exceptional poetic literacy. Young people often have an intuition about this. There's a reason they admire rap musicians, for example, who are often extraordinarily articulate in their performance and their capacity for spontaneous poetic utterance. The greatest people I've met, including great warriors, are exceptional in no small part because they are articulate. I know a former special operations soldier, Jocko Willink. Some of you might know of him. He's about 4 feet wide and 3 feet thick, and he's one tough son of a, well, you don't want to mess with him. He knows and articulates well that his success as an eminent warrior depends significantly on his ability to communicate. That because he could communicate well, he could listen to the men under his command. He could explain to his superiors the situation on the ground. He could make a case for deserving subordinates to be promoted. He could think strategically and avoid losing battles. So that's the case for being articulate. What's the alternative? Do you want to be inarticulate? Do you want to say like, and ah, stumble, pause, and be unable to formulate a strategy or elucidate a vision? Do you want to be unable to compel or convince others, to entice them with your articulated vision of what might be? Would you choose awkwardness over grace? That's preposterous. It's beyond foolish. I cannot understand why this case isn't made compellingly, particularly to young men. It's not being communicated because young men are dropping out of the educational realm in droves, and it's unbelievably sad. So how do you become articulate? By paying attention to what you say. That's a good start. What do I mean by that? Pay attention to what you say. Here's an analogy. Imagine you're trying to walk across a swamp. The swamp is murky, but you know there's a path of stones beneath the water. The path twists and moves. If you stay on the path, you won't drown, and the crocodiles in the swamp won't devour you. As you walk forward, you feel with each step where the next stone might be. When you feel it's solid, you step on it. Then you repeat the process with your other foot. That's what you do with your words. You feel, is this the right word? Is the fact that I'm uttering it putting me together, making me intact and stronger, or is it tearing me apart, making me dissolute and weak? You can learn to do this. I learned part of this from reading Carl Rogers, a great clinician. Rogers believed the integration of language and action was a necessary precondition for functioning as an effective clinician. To align what you said with who you were, and to recognize that one of the things your clients would evaluate you for was that capability. You might say that someone with such a capability manifests as genuine and trustworthy. More than that, I would add, they come across as compelling and interesting, though that can sometimes be gamed. However, the entire combination that emerges from articulate communication cannot be easily gamed. You feel your way. I noticed 40 years ago when I started thinking these things through that much of what I said actually made me feel weak. I didn't know why exactly, but sometimes some things I said didn't have that effect. Those words weren't accompanied by a sense of shame or vulnerability. They felt solid. At the beginning, that was probably only about 5% of what I said. The rest of my language was instrumental. It was used to get my way in the manner Tammy described when she introduced me tonight. There was an arrogance in my use of language, a desire to attain proximal victories, to appear smart, to win an argument, or something similar. This is very different from merely feeling my way along to find the appropriate word for each moment. But you can learn to do that. You can listen to yourself. You can stop using fillers like ah, like, and you know. You can take the time necessary to craft your words carefully. You can practice merely saying what you believe to be true. You can read great writers. You can write about the problems that obsess you. By doing these things, you can become articulate, and there is nothing about this journey that isn't the adventure of your life. It's a moral endeavor in a real sense. To become articulate is to become the master of your own tongue. To become properly articulate is to make the word divine, to treat it as such, and to decide whether or not you believe that the divine word creates the order that is habitable and good. If you don't believe that, then what do you believe? And if you do believe it, go all in. See what happens if you become articulate. And let me give you one more small example. Tammy touched on this in her introduction. She said she learned to pause. She said, our action, you can pause. It's a prayerful pause in some sense. When you're in a discussion, someone might present you with a question, a conundrum, or a proposition. Instead of immediately responding with what you think is right, you could ask yourself, what do I actually think about that? What incentive are you giving to try to make the other person confront with their own fear? But it has to be a real question, the kind of question you'd pose to someone you didn't know, predicated on the idea that you might not know who you are. You could ask yourself, so when someone presents you with a question, you pause and think, what do I think about that? You have to genuinely want to know the answer. The answer will make itself known. That's how thought works. Then you can simply communicate that answer. If you do this, you'll be interesting immediately. You'll be interesting to the person you're talking to. If they do the same to you, they'll be interesting as well. If you both do this, you'll have an interesting conversation. If you have an interesting conversation, you'll both grow as a result. That's the pathway to growth. You can wait. You can open yourself up to the possibility that what needs to be said will make itself manifest, provided that's what you're striving for. Then you can merely communicate that, but to do so, you must abandon instrumentality. One of the reasons Joe Rogan is so successful, by the way, is precisely this. Joe simply asks questions. He's not trying to get something from his guests. He's not trying to become more famous or wealthier. He doesn't need those things. There's no instrumental utilization of language in his discourse. He's just a humble guy in the most profound sense who wants to know more than he does. He asks all the stupid questions he can think of. It turns out he's actually very smart and well-educated after talking to hundreds of people and listening. The questions he asks aren't stupid. They're shared by virtually everyone listening. He takes his audience along on a process of exploratory endeavor, and it's a pathway to success. The same can be true of your life. The pathway to success is guided by the spirit of honest inquiry. If every word you say reflects what you believe to be true, the pathway you walk becomes a golden pathway to success. And I know that to be true.